Welcome to Group 4's analysis of the Cola Wars. We began by discussing the profitability of Five Forces models associated with carbonated soft drinks. We believe that the profitability in this industry is largely related to increased consumption and lower prices. Consumption specifically because the average consumer in the 1970s went from consuming 23 gallons of soft drink to approximately 46 gallons in 2007. We also noticed that the price per case of soda dropped from $11 in the 1980s to about $8 in 2009. With this profitability, we also assessed the five forces. And the first one we discussed was the threat of entry or barriers of entry. Clearly, with these two large organizations of Coca-Cola and Pepsi, their proprietary or secret recipes are difficult for other organizations to replicate. There's stiff costs associated with capital to enter into this market, as well as high costs for advertising and marketing. We also discussed the threat of substitutes. But historically, the threat of substitutes has been relatively high, so the consumer preference and loyalty to these brands has outweighed some of that. We also looked at and discussed the freestyle soda machines that was introduced in the 2000s when Coke was able to blend some of its flavors to reduce shelf space and offset some of the threats that were associated with it.
With regards to the bargaining power of buyers, we've determined that overall individual consumers are insignificant, although it's notable that this is the largest segment of the beverage market. So there is some sway here and attention must be paid to consumer trends. With regard to suppliers, we see the threats here as relatively limited, mainly due to the relative size of Coke and Pepsi within their industry, as well as the fairly restrictive agreements they've signed with their concentrate producers as well as bottling partners. For example, bottlers are not able to carry products that directly compete with Coke or Pepsi's main cola products. And then finally, the paramount factor here with regard to Porter's Five Forces model obviously deals with the rivalry between Coke and Pepsi. They are fierce rivals. They tend to mimic one another when success happens, and they also take the opportunity to not repeat one another's mistakes. Coke is the dominant player, although Pepsi has gained much market share over the past decades. They both, however, do face slowing market trends as health consciousness has come up, and the availability of ready substitutes has become more prolific as well.
All right, next we talked about the concentrate industry versus the bottling industry and which one was more profitable. As a group, we came to the consensus that the concentrate business is much more lucrative, and that's for several different reasons. Overall, there's a lower number of concentrate providers in their industry. For example, Coke and Pepsi combined equal about 72% of the concentrate business, where Pepsi alone employs 106 bottlers in the year 2009. So there's a lot more bottlers fighting over their market share. Bottlers have a lot higher capital costs. For instance, each one of their plants costs hundreds of millions of dollars versus $50 to $100 million for a concentrate plant. 58% of the cost of goods sold is carried by the bottler, and concentrate providers only carry about 22% of the cost of goods sold. And overall operating income, after all the expenses are said and done with, concentrate gets 32% of that operating income versus the bottler's 8% after expenses.
So with any rivalry, there's good effects and bad effects. The case begins with the Pepsi CEO saying that Pepsi is responsible for Coke's success and vice versa. And that's innovation, one of the positives. They also learn from each other's mistakes and successes and are able to copy the successful strategies and avoid things like reformulating Pepsi after they didn't do that after New Coke failed in the mid-'80s. So that's something they learned from their competitor. The rivalry also helped to crowd out competitors and new entrants. Every lawsuit that Coke launched in the early 1900s kept somebody out from competing with Pepsi as well as from competing with Coke. They were also positioned to purchase substitutes when that disruptor came into the market, as well as the expansion of contracting rights to restaurants is another area where they were able to copy each other's strategies. The negatives that come from this are price conflicts and price wars, stealing each other's policies as far as pricing with the bottlers and with the concentrate companies drove prices down. And that also happened on the consumer end, which diminished growth and profits in the industry. Substitutes that they've now purchased and are selling have helped to cannibalize their profits as they're carrying more SKUs. They have more warehousing and distribution costs with that. And then this head-to-head rivalry has allowed Dr. Pepper Snapple Group to collect a decent-sized market share. They've increased their market share 5.5% since 1988.
So our group's roadmap to sustain profits for both Coke and Pepsi start with continued global brand expansion by implementing growth strategies in China, India, along with entering into developing countries. Also, another one is countering substitutes like water and tea. For example, Dasani, Lipton, Minute Maid. Then diversification, entering snack food industry like Pepsi acquiring Frito-Lay, acquiring restaurants like Pizza Hut and KFC, and then going into non-CSD products like the article mentions with Gatorade and vitamin water. And then also keeping brand loyalty. We think that's important, engaging with the loyal consumers and communities with projects like Pepsi Cares and We Care by Coke.